We are living through an era where the individual has committed psychological suicide in order to survive socially. You are exhausted, not because life is demanding, but because you are expending all your psychic energy maintaining a false front. You are wearing a persona, the mask of the agreeable, the accommodating, the perpetually nice person, and you are wearing it so tightly that it has begun to asphyxiate the authentic self beneath. The world observes this exhaustion. They see the effort required to keep the smile fixed while the internal structure is collapsing, and they respond accordingly. When the small disrespect occurs, the joke that cuts too deep, the boundary that is casually bulldozed, you swallow it. You repress the instinctive, necessary aggression that should have been deployed to protect your territory. This is where the illness takes root. Repression is not erasure, it is storage. You are not disposing of the psychic material. You are compacting it, forcing it into the dark cellar of the personal unconscious. And in that darkness, it begins to live. It coagulates around the core trauma of self-betrayal, forming what I term an autonomous complex. A complex is not a concept, it is a fact. It is a splinter of the personality that has broken off and gained a terrifying independence. It operates outside your conscious control. When the complex is fed by repeated acts of repression, by the constant surrender of your dignity, it gains power, becoming a foreign entity dictating your life script. The sinking feeling you experience is your true self screaming for air. But the complex, now the dominant force, whispers the destructive, familiar script. Stay quiet, don't rock the boat. You need their approval more than you need your truth. You ask, why do they do it? And more importantly, why do I let them? The answer lies in the objective reality of the human relational field. It is a brutal economy of psychic power. People are not interested in the polished veneer of your persona. They are testing the tensile strength of your soul. They are probing for the weakest point in the fence line. When you consistently fold, when you smile and say, "It's okay, don't worry about it," you are projecting a specific psychological signal. I am hollow. My core is absent. I can be used. This projection acts as an irresistible invitation to the shadow side of the other person. They are not conscious villains. They are simply reacting to the void you have presented. They are sensing the lack of real presence. The individual who has sacrificed their inner life for the sake of social acceptance becomes translucent. The world looks right through them and sees only the empty space where the integrated self should reside. Think of the mechanism of availability. Your constant immediate availability is not generosity. It is a symptom of neurosis. It signals that your time has no intrinsic value, that you have no inner life worth defending. You have no sacred reserve. The moment you are always reachable, always accommodating, always apologetic for existing, you are teaching the world that you are cheap. You have successfully trained them to disregard you. This is the horrifying truth. You are the architect of your own humiliation. The external disrespect is merely the reflection of the internal contempt you hold for your own instinctual truth. The individual trapped in this neurosis, this endless pursuit of external validation, is terrified of the sharp pain of confrontation. They fear the rejection, the silence, the possibility of being seen as difficult. So they choose the slow, chronic poison of being walked on. They choose the slow death of the soul over the single, decisive surgical cut required for self-preservation. This avoidance guarantees a far worse outcome. The conflict you try to avoid externally becomes an internal civil war. The repressed contents, the anger, the necessary aggression, the truth, do not remain docile. They turn inward. They manifest as anxiety, as chronic exhaustion, as the pervasive sense that life is meaningless. This is the internal betrayal that leads directly to existential ruin. Your soul is screaming because you are abandoning it daily to feed the greedy persona. The cure is not found in weak, sentimental advice like share your feelings. That is psychological nonsense when dealing with a power dynamic. Explaining your feelings to someone who has already classified you as weak is handing them the map to your soft underbelly. It is ammunition. What is required is the immediate, non-reactive integration of the shadow, the darker, stronger, boundary-setting self that you have rejected in your pursuit of niceness. You must become the abyss. When disrespect is tossed at you, it is an energetic throw. The person expects a bounce back, anger, tears, retreat, an explanation. They expect engagement. When you offer none of these, when you simply absorb the disrespect, and offer back a silent, immovable presence. You break the script entirely. The ball vanishes into the black void. There is no reaction, no explanation, no apology, just the cold, hard fact of your boundary. They are left unsettled. They are unsure what they are dealing with. They stop testing, not because they suddenly love you, but because they have encountered an objective reality, a psychic structure that holds its ground. They register you as a force that requires respect, not because you demanded it with words, but because you embodied it through silence and non-negotiable presence. This shift from reaction to objective presence is the first agonizing step toward individuation. You must stop begging for approval and start commanding respect through the sheer weight of your integrated self. The price of waking up is the sacrifice of the crowd. You must accept the solitude that comes with being a conscious individual. The mass despises those who stand outside the collective sleep. You must choose now, the approval of the fleeting moment, or the brutal, permanent reality of owning your own soul. That shift from reaction to objective presence is the first agonizing step toward individuation. You must stop begging for approval and start commanding respect through the sheer weight of your integrated self. But why is this so hard? Why does the adult human being equipped with intellect and instinct willfully walk into the fire of humiliation? We must look deeper than mere social cowardice. The issue is structural. It is a failure of the inner architecture, specifically the disastrous identification with what I call the persona. The persona is not just a costume you put on for a party. It is a necessary, rigid psychic structure, a mask developed by the ego to deal with the demands of the collective world. It is the compromise you make between who you truly are and what society expects you to be. It is the competent professional, the supportive friend, the easygoing partner. Without some degree of persona, you cannot function in the world. But when you mistake the mask for the face, when you invest all your psychic energy into maintaining that outward shell, you have committed a profound act of self-betrayal. You are no longer living, you are perpetually performing. Think of the nice guy or the people pleaser. Their persona is built on the foundation of agreeableness and non-conflict. This structure is inherently fragile because its entire existence relies on external validation. The persona is not self-sustaining. It needs constant feedback, likes, praises, smiles, to confirm its reality. When you are addicted to approval, tolerating disrespect becomes a necessary, if painful, transaction. You swallow the insult because the alternative, confrontation, risks shattering the persona, risking the loss of the external validation that keeps your entire self-concept afloat. The failure to establish boundaries is, therefore, a symptom of a deeper neurosis, the refusal to surrender the comfortable lie of the persona. This is where the cold, mechanical law of psychic compensation comes into play. The mind is a system of balances. The more energy you pour into inflating and rigidifying the persona, the more aggressively you insist on being the good one, the easy one, the unshakable one, the more forcefully you must repress everything that contradicts that image. This rejected material does not dissolve. It sinks into the shadows, solidifying into the shadow. The shadow contains all the vital, aggressive, necessary instincts you deemed socially unacceptable. The capacity for righteous anger, the brutal honesty, the ability to say no without apology, the raw, self-serving drive for survival. The more brilliant the light of your persona, the deeper and darker the shadow becomes. It grows in the basement of your psyche, gaining an autonomous power. And since the conscious ego, identified completely with the gentle persona, cannot possibly integrate this aggressive shadow, the shadow must find an outlet. It gets projected. You are seeing the disrespect, the aggression, the selfishness of others not merely as external events, but as the manifestation of the dark, powerful contents you have rejected in yourself. This is the psychological trigger you are pulling every day. You attract disrespect because you are subconsciously inviting others to act out the aggression you refuse to own. The person who constantly complains about being walked over is usually projecting their own suppressed desire to be ruthless and self-serving onto the world. They become the victim in a drama where the perpetrators are simply carrying the weight of the victim's own unlived life. And this projection is deadly because it creates a fundamental disconnection from objective reality. You are fighting phantoms. You are not seeing the person in front of you clearly. You are seeing the carrier of your own repressed complex. When someone tests your boundary with a slight joke or a late arrival, your conscious persona wants to smile and retreat, fearing conflict. But your unconscious shadow is screaming for confrontation. This internal civil war, the conflict between the performing persona and the repressed shadow, results in the sinking feeling, the gut-wrenching anxiety that precedes every act of self-abandonment. That feeling is not just embarrassment. It is the raw pain of your instinctual self being sacrificed for the sake of a fragile, external approval. To survive this epidemic of neurosis, you must perform a psychological operation. You must recognize that the fear of confrontation is not a fear of the other person. It is a fear of the aggressive power of your own shadow, which you believe, if released, will destroy you or alienate everyone around you. The cold, hard truth is this: the persona must be relativized. It must be demoted from the owner of your soul to a mere functional tool. You must deliberately integrate the capacity for necessary conflict, the capacity for the sharp, surgical no. This integration is the process of individuation, and it is the only path to genuine respect. If you continue to live solely through the persona, seeking validation from the mass, you will remain trapped in this cycle of projection and humiliation. You will forever be the architect of your own ruin, inviting others to finish the job your own cowardice started. Stop apologizing for taking up space. Stop making yourself small. You must stop trying to be liked and start being real. The price of reality is the sacrifice of the comfortable lie. Pay it now or pay it with the total dissolution of your psychic structure later. The choice is brutal, but it is entirely yours. We need to stop focusing exclusively on the external aggressor. That is the fundamental diagnostic error of the modern mind. We obsess over the jerk who cut us off, the boss who overlooked us, the partner who betrayed us. But the man outside is only capable of inflicting a superficial wound. The catastrophic damage, the kind that leads to psychological collapse, is always inflicted by an internal enemy. The cold, hard truth is this: the people who disrespect you are merely triggering a pre-existing condition. They are pressing a button that you, through repression and avoidance, wired into your own central nervous system. This button is attached to what I term the autonomous complex. A complex is not just a bundle of bad memories. That would be too simple. A complex is a splinter of the psyche, a functional fragment of the personality that has been split off from the conscious ego, yet retains its own source of energy and, critically, its own will. It is a psychic fact, an objective reality within your subjective experience. It is trauma with teeth. When that minor disrespect hits you, the sharp joke, the interruption, the dismissal, the ego, the nominal center of your consciousness, should be capable of holding the line. It should register the event and apply a measured, surgical response. But often, the ego is paralyzed. It freezes, smiles, and retreats. Why? Because the complex has seized control. Imagine the psyche as a complicated mechanism, a structure containing immense pressure. The ego is the driver, sitting at the controls, believing it determines the direction. But buried deep in the machinery, perhaps fueled by a childhood humiliation or a profound abandonment, is the approval seeker complex, or the victim complex. This complex is a tyrant. It doesn't want health. It wants the repetition of the familiar pain. It is energized by the memory of its own suffering. When the external disrespect occurs, the complex sees an opportunity. It floods the system with its own energy charge, overwhelming the ego. The ego is instantly demoted. It becomes a terrified passenger watching its own hands betray it. You are literally witnessing a psychological seizure. That moment when you swallow your anger and offer a nervous apology, that is not you acting. That is the complex operating autonomously, compelling behavior to sustain its own neurosis. It forces you to choose the path of submission, because submission confirms its reality and feeds its energy. This is why the reaction is always disproportionate to the offense. Why does a small slight feel like the end of the world? Because the complex is tapping into the original catastrophic wound. The external event is just a pinprick, but the complex turns it into an arterial bleed. We must understand the terrifying autonomy of these fragments. They are not under conscious control. They are like internal parasites, feeding on the unlived life, the repressed rage, the silent sacrifice of your dignity. When a person constantly sabotages their own success or stays in relationships that are clearly ruinous, they are not weak. They are being governed by a powerful, autonomous complex, perhaps the failure complex or the self-punishment complex, that demands that the individual returns to the familiar, painful script. Your neurosis is not a flaw in your character, it is a symptom of this internal governance. The man suffering from the rejection complex will project his fear onto every interaction. He will interpret neutral actions as slights. He will become so preemptively needy that he repels the very connection he craves. He is creating the rejection to satisfy the complex's need to be right about the world being hostile. The people who walk over you are simply responding to the signal your complex is broadcasting. You are projecting a giant sign that reads, "My boundaries are suggestions. I am available for sacrifice." They don't need to be consciously cruel. They are merely acting out the role demanded by your internal script. They become the oppressor because your complex insists on being the victim. To engage in the process of individuation, to become a whole, functioning human being, requires a civil war against these internal tyrants. You cannot negotiate with a complex. You cannot analyze it away with gentle reasoning. You must confront the specific, solidified energy of that fragment and withdraw its autonomy. This confrontation is the sacrifice. It is the necessary payment for reality. It means facing the raw, terrifying contents that were repressed, the aggressive capacity of your shadow, the infantile rage, the desperate need for approval. This material, which you fear will destroy you if released, is what gives the complex its power. You must integrate that energy back into the conscious ego, even if it feels like you are integrating a hostile foreign body. The moment you stop allowing the approval seeker complex to dictate your reactions, the moment you choose the sharp, surgical no over the comfortable, neurotic smile that complex starves, its energy source is cut. It loses its autonomy and is forced back into the totality of the psyche, where it can be handled by the conscious ego, not the other way around. If you continue to avoid this internal confrontation, you are guaranteeing a life of being hijacked. You will remain a passenger in your own body, watching helplessly as your internal tyrants force you to tolerate humiliation and invite ruin. Your choice is stark. Either take the difficult, painful path of integrating the complexes, or submit to a slow, methodical, psychological suicide, where the ego is gradually dissolved by the very forces it tried to repress. Do not mistake silence for peace. Silence is the sound of the complex locking the door. Break the lock. Now. We obsess over the aggressor. We analyze their motives, their cruelty, their lack of empathy. We catalog their offenses as if compiling a psychological police report. This is the oldest, most dangerous trick the psyche plays on the ego. Psychological self-defense through externalization. We are projecting. The people who consistently disrespect you, the ones who walk over your boundaries with such casual brutality, are not merely external antagonists. They are functioning as carriers for the contents of your own unconscious. They are holding the mirror, reflecting the exact qualities, the strength, the self-interest, the sheer ruthless capacity for aggression that you have repressed, judged as unacceptable, and exiled into your shadow. Think about that for a moment. The villain in your story is, to a terrifying degree, you yourself projected onto the world. The human mind is fundamentally cowardly when facing its own darkness. We cannot tolerate the idea that we possess the same capacity for cold indifference or calculated self-preservation that we see in the person who just humiliated us. So, what do? We rip that capability out of our own structure, label it evil, and assign it to the external figure. This is why confrontation is so difficult and why the disrespect feels so agonizingly personal. You are not just fighting a boundary violation, you are fighting the return of the repressed. You are fighting the recognition that the power to hurt, the power to dominate, the power to say no without apology resides just as strongly within your own structure. But because you have refused to integrate that power, because you have insisted on maintaining the neurosis of being nice or good, that power must be experienced as an assault from the outside. It is easier to call them a monster than to admit that you have the same teeth. This mechanism of projection is the engine of the victim complex. If they are entirely at fault, then I am entirely innocent. This stance provides a perverse, toxic comfort. It eliminates the necessity of growth. If the world is disrespecting me, I don't have to change my fundamental structure. The world does. I can remain the flawless, suffering martyr, perpetually waiting for external reality to correct itself. This is not a life. It is a psychological suicide by outsourcing. When you cling to the narrative of victimhood, you hand over the keys to your internal structure to the very people you despise. You make yourself dependent on their behavior for your emotional stability. The trauma becomes the core of your identity, the complex of the injured one. This complex, like all autonomous fragments, demands continuous nourishment. Its food is your suffering, your complaining, your endless cycle of recounting the disrespect. It requires you to stay wounded, because if you heal, the complex dissolves, and you lose the identity you have built around the pain. We are addicted to the wound. We fetishize the injustice. We must destroy this addiction. The first step in dismantling the complex that invites disrespect is withdrawing the projection. Stop analyzing their motives. Stop cataloging their sins. The moment you see an external act of contempt, you must immediately ask the brutal question: what part of my own shadow is that person acting out for me? If they are ruthlessly self-interested, where have I failed to apply necessary self-interest? If they are dismissive of my time, where have I been dismissive of my own time? If they are aggressive in defense of their territory, where have I been passive in defense of mine? This realization is agonizing. It strips away the comforting illusion of moral superiority. You have to face the cold, hard truth. You invited the aggression by signaling psychological weakness, and the aggressor merely stepped into the vacuum you created. They are not the root sickness. They are merely a symptom of your own incomplete individuation. To integrate the shadow means pulling back the exiled power. It means recognizing that the capacity for necessary ruthlessness, or the surgical no, is a fundamental component of a functioning adult ego. You must own the strength to defend your boundaries, even if it makes you momentarily disliked or feared. That fear of being disliked is merely the complex fighting for its life, screaming that if you become whole, you will be abandoned. Let it scream. The price of integrity is often loneliness. The path of individuation demands this sacrifice. You must consciously integrate the aggressive, self-preserving instinct that you currently despise in others. You must realize that the ability to dominate a situation, to command respect through sheer presence, is not inherently evil. It is merely power, and power, like a sharp scalpel, is neutral. It can be used to destroy, or it can be used to establish the necessary structure for life. If you continue to project this power onto others, you will remain perpetually disarmed, perpetually surprised by their capacity for cruelty, and perpetually stuck in the neurotic cycle of being walked upon. You will spend the rest of your life fighting ghosts that wear human faces because you refuse to fight the real battle, which is internal. Stop pointing fingers at the external chaos. That chaos is merely the reflection of your internal disarray, your unintegrated complexes, your repressed shadow, and your cowardly ego clinging to the illusion of innocence. The work starts now, in the silence, alone. You invited the ruin. Now you must pay the price of admission to reality, which is the agonizing integration of everything you hate about yourself. The alternative is permanent psychological servitude. Choose. The cold, hard truth about integrating the shadow is that it doesn't make you a better person in the conventional sense. It makes you a whole person, and wholeness is terrifying because it includes the capacity for destruction, the instinct for self-preservation at any cost, and the chilling realization that you are capable of the same calculated cruelty you despise in others. This is the psychological scalpel. The integration of the shadow requires you to consciously accept the power you have vehemently projected onto every disrespectful person in your life. You have treated this raw, aggressive power, this necessary defense mechanism, as a toxic contaminant. You have repressed it, pushed it down into the personal unconscious, and then watched in horror as it manifested externally, warned by the very people who walk over you. The moment you retrieve that power, the moment you say, "Yes, I too can be ruthless. I too can be absolutely indifferent to your comfort when my boundary is crossed," the neurotic structure that has defined your life begins to collapse. This retrieval is the foundation for true psychological defense, which is not confrontation, but the absolute cessation of engagement. We call this strategic response the holy indifference. Neurosis, fundamentally, is a mechanism of reciprocal engagement. Your neurotic need to be liked meets their neurotic need to dominate, and they lock together like two gears grinding away your integrity. When someone tests your boundaries, the sharp joke, the intentional slight, the late arrival, they are not seeking a fight. They are seeking a reaction. They are looking for the familiar script. They expect the victim to perform, either by shrinking and apologizing, or by exploding in impotent rage. Both reactions confirm their control over your emotional state. Both reactions feed their autonomous complex. The holy indifference breaks the cycle. It is not apathy. Apathy is unconscious. Indifference is a conscious act of sovereignty. When the provocation arrives, you must allow the stimulus to enter your psychic structure, but you must deny it the energy required to activate your internal complexes. Complex, remember, is an autonomous fragment of the psyche, a trauma with a will of its own. Your need to please complex wants to jump up and apologize. Your fear of conflict complex wants to retreat into silence. These are not you. They are internal ghosts demanding control of the ship. Indifference is the act of watching these complexes scream for attention and allowing them to burn out in the silence of your consciousness. When the disrespectful behavior occurs, your response must be surgical, minimal, precise, and devoid of emotional investment. If someone interrupts you repeatedly, you do not raise your voice. You do not explain that they have hurt your feelings. You simply stop talking, wait for them to finish their irrelevant noise, and then, without acknowledging their interruption, you restart your sentence exactly where you left off, speaking with the same measured tone. If they try it again, you repeat the process. This is not rudeness. It is the establishment of an objective psychic fact. Your interruption has no bearing on my reality. The silence is the weapon. When you deny the aggressor their desired reaction, you are throwing their ball into a black abyss. Their complex is starved of the reciprocal energy it requires to survive. They are met with a wall of nothingness. This is profoundly unsettling to the human psyche because it denies the aggressor the validation of their own reality. They expected a mirror reflecting fear or anger. They received a void. The immediate consequence of employing this structure is that you become difficult to categorize. You become unpredictable. And in the social hierarchy, the unpredictable individual, the one who cannot be easily manipulated or provoked, is the one who must be respected. This is not about being liked. This is about being recognized as a self-contained system that cannot be breached. But be warned, the moment you establish this sovereignty, you become a target for the collective neurosis. The mass, the collective consciousness of the average individual, demands that everyone remain small, pliable, and predictable. When you begin the process of individuation, when you integrate your shadow and establish these firm psychic boundaries, you become a living reproach to the surrounding mediocrity. The mass hates the individual who is psychologically solid. It sees the individual as a disruptive element, a threat to the shared delusion. The collective wants you to remain in the neurotic cycle because it validates their own failure to undertake the agonizing work of self-realization. They will try every trick in the book to pull you back into the swamp of projection and shared weakness. They will call you cold. They will call you selfish. They will accuse you of being arrogant or unfeeling. These accusations are merely the defensive maneuvers of the collective complex attempting to reassert control. You must accept this rejection as the necessary price of admission to your own reality. Loneliness is not a failure of character. It is often the sign of psychological elevation. If you are doing the work, if you are truly integrating your repressed contents, you will naturally drift away from those who thrive only in the environment of mutual neurosis. The path to individuation is solitary because the work is specific to your own internal structure. You cannot afford the luxury of seeking approval from a sick society. The only way to survive the crushing weight of the mass and the constant testing of autonomous complexes is to remain absolutely centered in your own being. You are the only authority on your psychic structure. You are the surgeon, the architect, and the final judge. If you fail to do this work, if you continue to project your power and tolerate the slow erosion of your dignity, you are not just inviting disrespect from others, you are committing psychological suicide by proxy. You are handing the reins of your life over to the complexes of strangers. The choice is stark, and it is immediate. Undergo the painful, isolating, but necessary integration of your shadow, to establish your sovereignty, or remain a disposable piece of the collective machinery, perpetually surprised by the inevitable ruin you invited through cowardice. The neurosis will not stop testing you until you stop giving it what it wants. Stop giving it energy. Become the void. We have diagnosed the illness. We have dissected the mechanism of the complex. Now, the cold, hard truth. You stand at a critical juncture, and the choice is binary. The vast majority of humanity, the mass, chooses the path of comfort. They choose the anesthetic of collective neurosis. They choose to remain unconscious, believing that if they just agree with enough people, if they just keep the peace, the structure of their life will hold. They believe that being liked is a viable survival strategy. This is a fatal miscalculation. It is psychological suicide masquerading as social grace. When you refuse the painful integration of your shadow, when you refuse to establish the absolute authority of your own psychic structure, you are not simply avoiding conflict. You are inviting total internal fragmentation. You are handing over the keys to your life to the autonomous complexes of strangers. Look closely at why you allow the slow erosion of your dignity. It is rarely altruism. It is cowardice. It is the primitive animal fear of exclusion. We are instinctual creatures, and the deepest fear we carry is the terror of being cast out of the tribe. In the primitive context, exclusion meant death. In the modern context, we mistake psychological discomfort for physical doom. We confuse the sharp pain of setting a boundary with the mortal threat of being alone. And so people choose the slow poison. They sacrifice their conscious will and their objective reality on the altar of belonging. They repress their true feelings, their legitimate anger, and their necessary assertion of self. But where does that energy go? It does not vanish. It retreats into the darkness of the personal unconscious, coalescing around the core trauma. It forms an autonomous complex. This complex is not passive. It is an internal enemy with its own destructive agenda. It compels you to repeat the patterns of your past. It actively seeks out situations where you will be disrespected, where you will be betrayed, because that experience confirms the internal narrative of worthlessness written during childhood trauma. You are not a victim of external malice alone. You are a co-conspirator in your own humiliation, driven by a hidden autonomous power within your own mind. The reason you let them do it is because a part of you is addicted to the script. This is the grim reality of the neurosis. It is a self-perpetuating machine. Every time you apologize for existing, every time you retreat from a necessary confrontation, you are feeding that complex. You are giving it the psychic energy it needs to grow stronger. Soon it becomes the dominant force dictating your posture, your tone, and your availability. You become a puppet, animated by the trauma you refuse to face. The only way out is through the excruciating process of individuation. This is not therapy for the faint of heart. It is a deep existential confrontation. It requires the absolute sacrifice of the persona you have constructed, the agreeable, compliant mask that promises safety, but delivers only slavery. You must kill the part of you that begs for approval, and that death is agonizing. When you integrate your shadow, when you acknowledge the capacity for necessary aggression, for ruthless self-defense, for the absolute refusal to be violated, you stop being a magnet for disrespect. You become whole. You establish the boundary of your own soul. And when you establish that boundary, you stop projecting your internal deficiencies onto the external world. You stop seeing disrespect everywhere, because you are no longer broadcasting the signal of vulnerability. The path of individuation is a burden. It is the burden of consciousness. It means accepting that you will be misunderstood. You will be feared. You will be isolated from the collective comfort of the sick society. But isolation is the necessary prerequisite for psychological sovereignty. You cannot be sovereign while simultaneously seeking the warm approval of the crowd. The alternative is total ruin. You continue to tolerate the small violations, the jokes that cut too deep, the interruptions, and the casual dismissal of your objective reality. You are guaranteeing a mental breakdown. You are guaranteeing that the complex will eventually hijack your entire life structure. Your professional life will stall, your relationships will be marked by resentment, and your internal life will be a silent war zone. You must stop managing the opinions of others. You must stop explaining your reality to those who have no respect for it. You must become the void, the unyielding wall. The choice is not between happiness and sadness. That is childish fantasy. The choice is between enduring the sharp pain of truth today, the painful realization that you must stand alone and carry the weight of your own being, or choosing the slow, comfortable decay of illusion, which guarantees a terminal psychological diagnosis tomorrow. There is no middle ground. The neurosis will keep testing the fence line until the fence is either violently asserted or completely dissolved. If you are one of the few who can tolerate the cold, surgical reality of this diagnosis, if you are ready to abandon the collective dream and face the responsibility of your own mind, then you must act now. The psychic structure is collapsing. The collective sleep is deepening. We are looking for those capable of waking up. Subscribe to this channel to begin the work of exiting the collective neurosis.